Welcome to episode 94 of the Breaking Balls podcast. It's Daytona, Bob. We've got flips, fires, and the commentator's son won the race. And no, we're not talking about you, Lee Diffie.
No, we are not. We are talking about Jeff Burton's son, Harrison Burton, a major upset in the NASCAR Cup Series at Daytona. We will talk about the playoff ripple effect it has. Plus, in 2024 Corey LaJoie almost roughly translates to Kevin LePage. I was very scared for the rest of the field.
Flags in the air. Boogity, boogity, boogity. Let's go racing, boys.
All right, everybody. Bob, they say you should keep your words short and sweet because you may have to eat them later. And as I sit here after a Harrison Burton win at Daytona, I better start eating, pal. My gosh, does this flip things on its head.
Well, flip is a dangerous word to use after that race, Ad. I think we're going to be talking about the word flip a lot in this episode, but yes, it is Daytona week. The drafting style track has reared its ugly head. We had a lot of action to break down, but Harrison Burton, we didn't have that on the bingo card, making the playoffs in 2024. I will say, Ad, we do like to mention Harrison Burton at least one time on this podcast per episode. It's just this time we're getting it out of the way really early here. What a last lap.
It doesn't matter how many laps you lead in the race, as long as you lead the last one. It's exactly what Harrison Burton did today, and he punched his ticket to the playoffs. I mean, there is no... If you've been following along this podcast long enough, you know that there is nothing I love more than throwing jabs at Harrison Burton just for the heck of it. And today I got my mouth shut because ultimately he led the last lap, punched his ticket to the playoffs, and I don't know. If you're a member of the Burton family tonight, you're just having a really strong night. This was a movie script for you as far as you're concerned. What a night.
A movie script with Morgan Freeman-like narration. You had Lee Diffie in his first call with NBC on the Cup Series side and just absolutely delivered. Jeff, your boy won, or I don't know how he phrased it there, but just an absolute let the moment breathe there type call from Lee Diffie. Incredible last lap. You have Kyle Busch looking like he's finally going to do it. He's finally going to get that win to keep that 20-year win streak alive. And then on the last turn, now you have Harrison Burton surge by going into turn 3. They're neck and neck, and Burton just takes that lead there going into the final turn. And then you have a wild block where Kyle Busch sends it. A lot of people, Austin Dillon included, his teammate at RCR, would have probably wrecked Harrison Burton right there. But Kyle Busch just gives him the tap there, sends him under the yellow line. No controversy. We're good. We're fine. And just an absolute hold your breath last turn there. Harrison Burton, your winner, though, in a shock upset.
It's one of those situations, Bob, where as I was watching the race, it just felt like this was finally going to be Kyle Busch's race. It felt like, okay, all is going to be right in the world. He'll find a way to pull this out, to win. I really thought there's no way Harrison Burton's able to hold him off, but sure enough, you've got to give him a ton of credit because drove the heck out of the thing. And like you said, it was just so much fun to watch that last little bit of racing. Nothing dirty, just, a really good, clean, hard finish. And as a NASCAR fan, especially at Daytona, that's all you can ask for, especially with some of the calamity we saw earlier in the race.
I mean, we think about flips. Harrison Burton was the original flip in the next-gen car at Daytona in the 500 in 2022. He rolled over in, I think, the first 10 laps there on that Wood Brothers 21. So, again, when you search Harrison Burton Daytona, the search results are finally going to be different for him. So I'm glad to see that. And for Jeff and the whole family, it's going to be a fun night partying there. And again, that's the 100th win for that historic Wood Brothers racing team ad there. Again, they've definitely front piled the wins as far as their NASCAR career. But the fact that they've had 100 wins, they still are in the Cup Series, still at the point now where with that Penske alliance, they're technically basically a Penske fourth team at this point. But to have that history and to be able to say, I'm your 100th winner, that's huge for Harrison Burton, for the Wood Brothers to stay around in NASCAR. A handful of teams have gotten to that milestone. That's a very, very huge mark there for them. It's very cool. And I guess we probably should focus more on that side, the upset side and the good side. But there's a lot to break down in this race here. If you're Jeff Burton, I guess you're very excited. But if you're Kyle Busch and Brexton Busch, you're not as happy. That father-son duo is very different on that side there. It just feels like for Kyle Busch, it feels like he loses every single other way. And I want to make this one other point here before I'll give it back to you. Harrison Burton, 1 super speedway win. Kyle Larson, 0. I'm officially saying Harrison Burton is a better super speedway racer than Kyle Larson. It's just facts.
So if we're going to really stick with, a logical series here, Kyle Larson thinks he's better than Max Verstappen. Harrison Burton just proved that he's better than Kyle Larson. Is Harrison Burton better than Max Verstappen?
I think it's just a whole wheel of destiny here with somebody in the middle there, I guess. But you mentioned Kyle Larson there. He was a guy that was involved in an incident today. And, I mean, basically, if you were a driver or you were in an incident today, there were 6 guys not in incidents today. Kyle Larson was in that very first big one, semi-big one. We'll jump into the playoffs there in a second, but for regular season-wise, tough there because we'll look at the playoff guys. Everyone in the playoffs, it feels like, had a day too, but regular season wise, Kyle Larson incident today. Chase Elliott DNF'd on that wreck. Not Ross Chastain. Denny Hamlin eliminated by a points penalty earlier in the week, and Tyler Reddick just calm, clean and calm. Looks like the regular season points championship is just as murky as the playoffs after today.
You're 100% right. I mean, usually we kind of expected this to shape out a little bit. There's always the chance that a race like this happens when you go to a super speedway. But I guess in years past, it's always kind of, as the Macho Man Randy Savage would say, the cream always rises to the top, especially at tracks like this. But that just wasn't the case today. Like you said, if the best ability was availability at the end of this race, especially with all of the wrecks and things like that, but it certainly muddied the water at the top of the playoff standings for sure, because, I mean, just looking at it, it's crazy to consider how many of these guys didn't even finish today. It was a wild day in Daytona.
When you say the cream rises to the top, I'm picturing a frothy glass with foam rising over, and then a bartender taking a knife and just cutting the foam right off the top. That was Daytona, was that knife. Genuinely. Because I'm glad you kind of lead into the playoffs here. This is a race where obviously everyone thinks, okay, we're going to have a random winner here. We almost had chaos there with someone like a Parker Retzloff, a Cody Ware, but almost would have been better if someone like they had won because they're not a full-time driver. They wouldn't have taken a playoff spot, but Harrison Burton takes a playoff spot, and guys like Bubba Wallace, Chris Buescher, Ross Chastain, they're going, oh my God, anyone but him. Come on.
There was a moment there at the end of the race where I even thought Austin Hill had a chance, and I was like, okay, well, there's going to be a lot of guys who are going to be pretty big. Parker Retzlaff, Austin Hill, all those guys who aren't running the full-time Cup schedule because they could get a win and not affect the playoff standings. But oh my gosh, if you're Martin Truex Jr., who's pretty much to the good, but Ty Gibbs, Chris Buescher, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, all of those guys, you're looking at this race result and you got to put your head in your hands. You don't even know what to do with it at this point because we had, like we talked about at the beginning of this, we had a lot of things on our radar, but Harrison Burton being the winner of this race wasn't one of them. But that's just the beauty of super speedway race and the beauty of Daytona. It's chaos, Bob. The playoff standings are absolute chaos.
Well, yeah, and Truex has another day where just a lot of incidents in the second half of the race there. He's still 59, I believe, 58 points good to the cut line there, so he's okay, but Ty Gibbs, 39, Chris Buescher's plus 21. He ended up salvaging his day because Bubba Wallace and Ross Chastain both had incidents in big wrecks where they were taken out, or Ross Chastain wasn't taken out, had to fight his way back, though, onto the lead lap for most of the race. Chris Buescher was the only guy that was able to stay somewhat clean there, but again, this is all if everything goes to plan next weekend. You still have a 21 gap between Buescher and Wallace, and then Chastain further back. Who's to say someone like Eric Jones or a Josh Berry or a Chase Briscoe doesn't come out and win surprisingly next week? Eric Jones has won the Southern 500 twice in his NASCAR career. It's very unlikely that we get a surprise winner at Darlington, with this being the rare season finale ad. But again, in NASCAR this season, we've seen you really have to expect the unexpected.
I was going to say, are you willing to put money on the fact that we are going to get the run-of-the-mill, what we're expecting race, given everything you've seen this year? Because I am not comfortable doing so. But you took the words right out of my mouth there, Bob. I mean, what if a guy like Eric Jones, who has shown a ton of success at Darlington, comes out and wins and just slams the door on basically everybody on the cut line? I mean, it just sets up and it builds the suspense of the season. and it builds that storyline. And, especially with Lee Diffie in the booth now, we've just got, this is building towards something. And I'm just so excited to see, as a NASCAR fan, this is the most buzz I've felt around the end of a season in a very long time. And it really feels like we're talking about guys at the top of the playoffs. We're talking about guys at the cut line. There's just so many storylines right now in NASCAR. And I think it's really, really making this sport must-watch TV.
And the other thing to note with Eric Jones about Darlington next week is he missed the spring race. He was out with a back injury after a nasty wreck at Talladega. So we don't even know what Eric Jones looks like in the Toyota version at Darlington, but Toyotas generally have good speed at that track. So Eric Jones is a guy that I definitely want to see moving forward next week. But speaking of nasty wrecks, we were unfortunately seeing them a lot today. Multiple nasty wrecks in stage 3, especially there. You had Josh Berry and Michael McDowell flip. Josh Berry's was a lot more violent and flipped over. Michael McDowell was more of just a half flip while he rode Joe Logano into the wall, but still very violent wrecks both ways there. Let's start with Josh Berry's just because he unfortunately had the harder impact there. Nose first on his roof. I don't think I've ever seen that one kind of going windshield into the inside wall. That was just one of those where we were holding our breath there, I think.
It was terrifying to watch. I mean, it's one thing, anytime you see a guy kind of, slip out of the pack and hit the inside wall, you're worried about the type of impact that, that can be generated. It's terrifying, but at least you have the brakes to stop you, or at least try and stop you. But, in this instance, he's helpless. He's just sliding on his roof, and that impact was one of the. I have not been that scared watching an impact in NASCAR in a very long time. I mean, even though Denny Hamlin's, had that big impact at Richmond that didn't look all that bad, but then apparently it was something like 32 G forces or whatever. I don't know. You're so far out of my element when we're talking gravity, but I can only imagine the impact that Josh Berry felt. So, we kind of got to tip the cap to inventor, good year to have the inventor of the safer barrier going into the Hall of Fame, because you got to tip the cap, because at the end of the day, the fact that Josh Berry was able to get up and walk out of that car is a miracle. And it's really a great thing. And I was terrified watching that wreck, Bob.
Yeah, I'm glad he was able to get up and get out of the car. It did take a while for them to get that car flipped over there. I know it was probably protocol and all that. I just didn't love how long it did take. But again, the AMR safety team, they are world class there, and they ended up getting him out and right. And Josh Berry, even in his post-race interview at the Infield Care Center, said, it looks worse than it probably was. I'm fine. It was a guy that was kind of chipper and looked like he had not taken the hit that he did that we saw on TV there. Maybe it was worse than it looked there, but don't like seeing that, even with NASCAR adding that new shark fin this week. It kind of did its job with the Michael McDowell flip, didn't with the Josh Berry flip. Michael McDowell's flip, though, was equally just as wild to watch, because it was a car getting caught almost midair and being brought down to life with Joe Logano pulling him back down. We're bringing you back. You're coming back down. We'll guide you into the wall. Austin Cindric with a wild push there into turn 1 there, taking out a lot of good cars there in stage 3. But Michael McDowell and Joe Logano were definitely the big hits on that one, at least virally. What did you think about that?
It reminded me of old-time hockey in a weird way, Bob, because it looked like a 1980s hip check that Joey Logano the way that Michael McDowell's car landed on top of Joey Logano, it reminded me of a good old classic hip check. But I'll tell you this much. I was absolutely mother effing Austin Cindric at that point, because as we all know, all right hand up, I am a Michael McDowell fan. I thought the Long John Silver's car looked great, was sitting on the pole, had a really good opportunity to put himself in the playoffs. And then there was Austin Cindric. And I didn't like the push. I understand what he's going for there, but ultimately you're going into the corner, just not the time nor the place for it. Glad everybody's okay. You're not going to make any friends racing like that, though, is what I will say for Austin Cindric.
No, 100%, not at all. It's a shame because, like I said earlier, it did take out a lot of good cars. I know that's the beast that is super speedway racing, but someone like Austin Cindric there, it's tough there because he is not necessarily a younger driver, but he is more inexperienced than some of the Cup field. I know he has a win at Daytona, but he has been, he was brash in the way he won it, almost wrecking his teammate Brian Blaney en route to it. But as far as nasty pushes or questionable pushes, I guess I should phrase that. We had one on lap 60 early in stage 2 there where I guess we'll call it, I won't call it terrorism. People online are calling it terrorism. But again, we're mentioning Corey LaJoie for the wrong reasons on the podcast. Instead of it being the speed that we've seen from his Spire teammates like Carson Hocevar and Zane Smith, who is looking for a ride next year because he's been outed. We'll get to that later. You know, for Corey LaJoie, he's not in a seat next year. He's got to start to put together wins, and instead another incident where not only does he wreck his car, but takes out other guys and makes another enemy in Noah Gragson. Just a bad push from the backside. I don't know what to do here because it's just more and more incidents with Corey LaJoie. It feels like he's trying to do too much out there, right?
I think you hit the nail right on the head at the end there, Bobby. He's just trying to do too much. He's trying, he's almost overdriving the car, trying to prove that he belongs in a seat. And all he's doing is digging himself a hole deeper and deeper. And this one, you hit the nail on the head in the intro. It was very Kevin LePage-esque. Maybe not quite as egregious.
Well, no, that was just the incident on track. There was an actual Kevin LePage-like incident we'll get to in a minute there, Ad.
The on-track incident is what kind of got me, what really got me about the bump. It just, you hit it on the head, Bob. He's just overdriving the damn car, and you're not going to gain a seat at this point. At this point, you've shown what you are. You're probably going to have to go into a lower series and win if you're smart. And, I think that's kind of the next step for Corey LaJoie, but he just keeps trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. And it's not just costing him, it's costing people driving around him at this point.
Yeah, a lot of good cars taken out today in that wreck. You saw Denny Hamlin, who is a big-time favorite at Daytona, out after a tough weekend there. Again, for Corey LaJoie, a guy that I believe in last year's entire regular season in NASCAR's Cup Series level, didn't have a single DNF, has had multiple DNFs, has flipped over twice in the Cup Series this year. Again, there's a reason he's not going to be in the Cup Series next year. All indications from what I've heard is Truck Series is very likely. It should be a competitive seat there. But again, for Corey LaJoie, a team like Spire he's getting cut from is a team that has a developmental series in the Truck Series. They have ties in the Xfinity Series. So he's burning a pipeline from a team that has roots all the way down the Cup Series ladder. So that does take away options for him there. So he has to drive very carefully and get the most out of the results in these next 11 races, because the first 25 races of the season have been embarrassing for Corey LaJoie. And to be honest, that's not the driver he is. That doesn't represent who Corey LaJoie is. He's a better driver than that. He's in the Cup Series for a reason. He's gotten to Spire Motorsports and been the face of that team for a reason. But I think, like we just said a few minutes ago, he's trying too much. He feels the pressure and is doing too much. And some guys just, tighten up when that pressure happens. And unfortunately, it looks like Corey LaJoie is the result of that.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the next 11 races are going to be huge because nobody is going to give you a seat if you go out there and keep tearing up race cars, because you're an absolute liability that way. I mean, at the end of the day, we hear about the cost of racing a lot. And not that you need to drive so cautiously that, you're not putting yourself in the position to actually, get results or to get, to kind of finish where your team is expecting you to. But, you can't just go out there and tear up race cars for the sake of tearing up race cars. And that's exactly what Corey LaJoie feels like he's doing right now, is that, he's just trying, like he just kind of keeps trying to shove that square peg into a round hole, and it's just not working. And ultimately, I hope he can kind of take it down a notch in these next 11 races. The playoffs are coming, obviously not, he's not in the playoffs. Hopefully he's able to kind of just take a reset, understand, okay, this is where I'm at, and put together some of the finishes that we've seen historically from Corey LaJoie. Because if he does that, I think there's a strong chance he's back in the Cup Series pretty quickly. But if he continues down the path that he's been going on in the past few races, I don't know what the future looks like for him. And that's a very weird thing to say, all things considered.
Yep, 100% there. I think one thing to note there is that it's tough because you have his Spire teammates who last week ran in the top 10, and this week again 11th and 13th there for Zane Smith and Carson Hocevar. Were Corey LaJoie another result where he came back out after that incident there, and then has this moment where he's coming back out on the track on the front stretch ad, and has his almost Kevin LePage moment where he's on the lower level of the track and the whole field is coming around and he doesn't read the room and doesn't get all the way down, and the field gets around him there. But I noticed some people on Twitter also found the clip there and were kind of worried about the Kevin LePage like incident. Corey LaJoie, Kevin LePage, very, very early sounding in 2024, but again, I mentioned that Spire Motorsports 11th and 13th with Hocevar and Zane Smith. They're building on speed next year. A guy that potentially could be in that Spire number 7 for him was Justin Haley, who ended up 32nd DNFing in one of those late wrecks, but led laps today. Another guy that really showed some promise for next year with Justin Haley. Who else jumped out at you today?
I mean, I'll say, just as far as the whole weekend goes, I know I mentioned him earlier, and I'll mention him every podcast that I have an excuse to. It's Michael McDowell. I mean, just the way that he was able to get up front, stay up front there for a little while, it looked like he was going to have a great day until ultimately Austin Cindric just decided to crush my dreams. But at the end of the day, I was very impressed with the 34 car this weekend.
And a weekend where, for the first time in team history, Front Row Motorsports had both cars on the front row with him and Todd Gillen. Pretty cool there. Todd Gillen in the pickle car. Another guy that showed really good speed today, but him and Brad Keselowski both stage 3 penalties on pit road. Keselowski's was a little bit more easy to come back from, I guess, just because with those cautions there. And I know Gillen ended up making it back there, but got caught up in a late wreck. So I think he finished 23rd. He ended up just getting caught off the pace there. Keselowski ended up making it, but a late penalty there for Todd Gillen. Otherwise, he was able to match Michael McDowell's speed. A good weekend for Front Row, finally holding up to their name.
I agree. And you took the words right out of my mouth. Another guy that kind of was impressive, but the restart penalty. Hey, Bob, Brad Keselowski.
Yeah. I said pit road penalty, but yeah, restart penalty. Thank you.
Yeah, it very interesting. It was one of those things, you don't see it very often. It was kind of confusing, to kind of listen to the broadcast talk about it, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Brad Keselowski, no surprises that he, performed well at the super speedway. I mean, if you think that's a surprise, you just haven't been paying attention, but ultimately, ends up finishing, I believe, 8th today. So he ends up getting a little bit of a result out of the whole thing, but obviously that penalty at the end is just an absolute dagger to that team.
Yeah, it is. It's a shame, but it was the right call by NASCAR, I think, all things considered there. He did jump the restart, but I'm glad they made the right call. It's just you hate to see it handled like that late in the race there, This seems like every time we say the word penalty on this podcast, it's a big reason, or it's a big effect on the race. But anyway,
I mean, if you're a Brad Keselowski fan, you are literally posting the Denny Hamlin clip of, I believe, the first Richmond. Was it Richmond when he jumped the restart a little bit on Truex? You're posting that clip ad nauseum tonight because it just shows another inconsistency in how NASCAR's called races. But I think, like you said, Bob, you got to call it. It's a blatant, it's a blatant penalty. You have the rule for a reason. All credit to NASCAR for enforcing it, but you may just want to keep calling things by the book because at this point, there's quite a few inconsistencies that have been called. Another guy who actually impressed the hell out of me, Bob, and just ultimately didn't get the result that he maybe deserved was Bubba Wallace. I mean, a good, ended up being an okay day for him, but I think that team had winning aspirations going into this, and he actually, it looked as though he was going to be there at the end. Ultimately kind of gets wrapped up in that last wreck, but doesn't take away from the fact he also had a pretty good day.
Yeah, he got caught up in a wreck. Story of everyone's day there, it seems like, in the garage here. Again, him and Buescher, though, with top 10s today, at least salvaging something, even the worst case scenario with Harrison Burton winning today. As far as the teams-wise, first of all, a shout-out to Cody Ware. Top 5 finish for Rick Ware Racing, an absolute incredible result for him. And I will say, I saw I think it was Dirty Modo from Steve Letart's podcast, that coming into this week, he had 4 straight top 20s at Daytona. So a 5th straight top 20 for Cody Ware. Say what you want about the guy, but he avoids the big one. And at Daytona, when only 6 guys avoided that today at some point, That's impressive. Say what you want there, but incredible for him to get that result there, because you look at some of the teams like Penske, 0 for 3 with Cindric, Logano, and Blaney getting caught up in wrecks. They all DNF there today. And then Trackhouse, 0 for 2, technically 0 for 3. We'll get into that in a second there, Ad. With incidents there, you had Ross Chastain just getting caught in that early wreck because of Corey LaJoie. He ended up fighting to get back on the lead lap and eventually did fight his way onto the lead lap there. Where did he end up finishing there? I think it was inside the top 10, if I believe. 12th there. He ended up finishing 12th there. Yeah. And then Daniel Suarez got caught on fire because Denny Hamlin set him on fire there in the most gangster thing I've ever seen, pit road style. We'll get to the third Trackhouse driver in a minute there. You're wondering, well, there's only 2 Trackhouse. Well, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Well, hold on, Bob, because I've got something for you. It's a new name for the Breaking Balls podcast. Not a name that we've ever had the chance to mention, but finished 7th today, so we may as well. Parker Retzlaff, welcome to the show, my man. Very interesting to see him sniffing the top 10, but they don't ask how, they ask how many, and it's a good result for him.
And in that Beard Motorsports car that has historically only come to restrictor plate tracks, it always seems to perform, whether it's been Brendan Gaughan in that car. You've seen Noah Gragson fill in the last few years, Austin Hill. It's a team with, I think, 1 full-time employee over at Beard Motorsports. But the fact that they're able to produce a competitive restrictor plate or drafting style track car every year is just hats off to them. That's exactly what the NASCAR Cup Series is all about there, Ad. I'm with you, though. Parker Retzlaff, the RCR Xfinity driver, they always tab him into some random Cup races, and everyone goes, who is this guy? He can wheel it, though. He's not bad at all.
No.
It's just, you see the guy get out in the glasses, and you're like, who's this guy? I've never heard of him. But no, I'm with you. It was a good showing for the young driver today in that Beard 62 car. We did touch on it, though. Third Trackhouse, what are you talking about? Well, Shane Van Gisbergen did run the Colleague 16 car today, and he's going to run his 7 of the last 12 Cup races. Ad. He blew his engine there, and Steve Letarte was convinced that Eric Jones's tire blown at the same time had something to do with it. Sure, Steve, yeah, whatever, we'll go with that. Anyway, SVG blows an engine. He was running top 10, I think, at that point, got the announcer's jinx, but announced today that he is going full-time in the Cup Series as well for that Trackhouse number 88 entry, their third car. We have a video on that on the channel, but I'm excited to see what he can do as far as that Trackhouse car. It sucks for Zane Smith, but I have a feeling he'll find a spot on the front row or somewhere around there. Anyway, intent.
Yeah, I think obviously we've talked about Shane Van Gisbergen and the upside, obviously, with the road course racing. This just makes sense, especially, just with the road course racing ability you've got and how many road courses that we go to in the Cup Series now. I just think it ultimately came down to anytime you are road course racing, Shane Van Gisbergen gives you a chance to win. And I think ultimately that was probably the final straw in the decision. I think, Zane Smith has a ton of talent. He's going to win a lot of races. I think he's going to have a very successful career. But this is a great problem to have for your Trackhouse, because if your pipeline is too full in an instance like this, it's just, something's got to give. And ultimately they decided that it was going to be SVG to get this seat. And like you said, who knows? Zane Smith may end up in the front row. Is that right? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But good for SVG.
I'm not an insider here. I just pretend to be one. Although we did scoop the media on something this week. Go back to our channel and find that out. I'm just, tip of the cap to myself, Bob Perry Pockrass over here. Anyway, we are on to Darlington next week in the regular season finale for the Cup Series. It always produces a great race, one of the crown jewels of the schedule in the Southern 500 there. We will keep you updated on everything NASCAR here on Breaking Balls. If you're new here, of course, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the like button. It helps us out a ton as we grow forward here. Stay in the loop for everything NASCAR. Is there anything else that we missed here as far as on track or off track this weekend at Daytona?
Nope. I think we covered it all. I mean, all the flips, the fires, everything that happened at Daytona. Like you said, Bob has been putting out some great content on the channel every week. So make sure you go back. If you want to stay informed, make sure you check us out. Turn on post notifications. We're posting things every day at this point, and just keeping you up to date on all the news in NASCAR. I'm just excited to head to the Lady in Black next week, Bob.
We got the Lady in Black next weekend. We made it through a weekend of NASCAR racing without a single weather delay, as far as I believe. that's a miracle in itself with South Florida and the way that those pop-up showers happen in the summer. But again, Darlington next week. We will see you next weekend. Stay in the loop for everything Breaking Balls on YouTube and on Spotify and everywhere else. We're posting on Twitter, every good golly gracious, everywhere else on the green earth. But episode 94 of the Breaking Balls podcast, folks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.